Okay, this is the EDLP 209 Culminating Experience activity. And today we will be taking a look at Marco. Marco is a student who is now in 6th grade, and he's had an IEP since 2nd grade. There are some concerns that he has made very limited progress, and the parents have a deep concern and complaint that that progress is due to the fact that his accommodations and modifications have been inadequately implemented.
Okay, so as this is not just necessarily a straightforward case with a student with disabilities, the parents have gotten involved. They attempted to meet with the teacher to resolve the issues and their concerns with accommodations. And then because they were not satisfied with the accommodations and what they, in the meeting with the teacher, they decided to contact help me out here. Why can't I think of it? Thank you. An advocate. So that kind of leads the team to believe that it's starting to get contentious and maybe a little heated. So the principal's going to have some special responsibilities in this situation. So to set the stage a little bit for where the principal falls in this scenario, the principal's been at this site for 2 years, and in that 2 years has really been working on the LCAP goal of creating this interdisciplinary IEP team that was new to the culture of the school. It hadn't previously been occurring. It was more isolated. So this is something that is starting to work and build. However, with this particular situation, the principal's really going to be, it's going to be important for the principal to make that initial parent contact to set up the IEP. Typically, we know that it's a case manager that would make those calls, but because this situation needs to be fast-tracked to really support both the parent and the student, and also the teacher, to try to figure out how to support all involved, it's going to be that principal who's going to make that phone call and get that IEP on the agenda quickly. After getting the IEP scheduled, meeting with the teacher is going to be really important. As the parents have already complained about the teacher, they're really claiming that the teacher's not meeting really legal expectations via the IEP, and that this is a well-respected teacher. She's known to have high test scores, and yet these parents are not satisfied with her. So it's going to be really important for the principal to sit down and understand what is the teacher doing, what has the teacher done, what documentation does the teacher have, so that the teacher feels supported. The principal goes in really having that teacher's back and able to back up what the teacher states, and having that cohesion before the meeting occurs. Also, the principal is going to need to familiarize herself with the student himself, if she's not already familiar with him, both academically and socially, emotionally, so that she can show that she has a relationship and she can speak to that student, because that's going to help the parents to feel comfortable and help the parents to really feel like, in addition to this interdisciplinary team, the leader is the leader of this team, and that she's there to really support the kid. So really looking at the classroom data, any online support or any online tests that he's taking, so that she can really see what growth is being made or not being made, and maybe have a better understanding of why from the leadership role. And then looking at the social emotional piece of using Aries suspensions. Is he seeing the counselor already? If not, taking that into consideration as a possible support. And then also referrals and citations. And then as a principal, again, it's going to be her job to determine the stakeholders to be involved to support everybody, starting with the parents, Marco, and the teacher. So everybody needs to feel supported in this situation. It's not an isolation thing, and that again goes back to that LCAP goal. That this has been a tough change for the school, I'm sure, with trying to provide having the sped teacher in there, having the case manager, having the program specialist, and then any medical specialists who need to be a part of the IEP team, making sure that there's always a general ed teacher in the IEP team where this is something new. So it's going to be really important to continue with that practice, because that team is there to support the student and the parents and to show their expertise, because they're all experts in their own different discipline. And then creating that availability for team members to ask questions and discuss the case. The purpose of that is really because again, this is a special circumstance. There's going to be questions, there's going to be concerns, and it's going to be the leader's responsibility to make herself available for that communication piece, so that if a question comes up, it can be answered, so that everybody feels comfortable and confident going into this meeting. And that means to everybody, the parents even need to be able to feel confident that she's available to ask questions of before they go into this meeting, so that they feel supported. So prior to the meeting ever starting, this is going to be the responsibility of the principal. During the meeting, as we well know, it really is the responsibility of the principal to facilitate the meeting. She's going to make sure that those meeting norms are really set out, and that everybody knows that the whole point is to support the family and the student. Every person who's in that room, every stakeholder is there to meet the needs of the child, and to really have best practices in place and positive intentions always. That's really the expectation of all people involved. The stakeholders present, again, it's going to look different for each individual, and for Marco, it would have to be determined what that team would look like, but really determining who it would be that needs to be present for his, to support everything that he needs to help make that growth that he hasn't been making. And then really stating the reason for the meeting and the intended outcomes, which of course the intended outcomes are the parents need to feel more confident that the team is there to help their child learn, but also the intended outcomes are for there to be a plan in place for their child to learn, and that's going to be facilitated by the leader, but also by the team, where it's really going to be a collaborative activity. So that support is there. Additionally, we are in, as well, this school is in a specific kind of a special circumstance in that there's 52% of those undocumented student or unduplicated students. Therefore, the school has some funds to spend and provide extra programs if necessary to support students with disabilities, EL students, and Marco falls in that category. So we may have that luxury of being able to offer him more to support his learning. However, it's really important that the principal is the one who is able to help support and guide in the spending of that money and what that might look like for programs and services. Something also that's really important is that there's timelines, and there are timelines that it's clear that it's expected that they're adhered to. So if there needs to be a plan in place, there needs to be dates and deadlines and what those clear expectations are. And the principal is going to be the one who needs to oversee those throughout, not just the meeting and being clear at what the goals are, but overseeing them throughout the timeline as well, to ensure that they are continuing and there's oversight to make sure that everybody's on task continuously to meet the end goals that are determined by the team. And then making sure that the data that's determined to be collected is a clear, smart goal, that it's measurable, it's actionable, and that it meets the needs of the student, but it's also reasonable and realistic. And then I think to end it, with this whole entire process, communication has to be key. The teacher has to be able to openly communicate with the principal and the principal has to be available for that, because it's a change, and it's, if something's difficult, the leader has to be available. The parent has to feel confident that if they have a question, they're not happy with something, that the principal is available for that open communication. And then also anybody who's on that interdisciplinary team, if there's something comes up, there's a question, the principal needs to be the leader in that and be able to support all of them in making sure that all of those goals that they made promises to are met.
All right, and before I get into sort of how the principal might facilitate this first IEP, I'd like to start by just kind of setting the stage, because we just need to remember that right now we have an advocate involved. Parent is really concerned about her child's education. He's received an IEP. This is going on his 5th year, and consistently grades continue to dwindle, and this, as a 6th grader, has been his worst year. And so things are pretty heated going into this, and this is something that I think that the administrator really needs to reflect in regards to just how the administrator is going to be facilitating the meeting, and really making sure that the principal, that she does everything possible to ensure that the team comes up with some solutions that are going to work for the parent. So I think the first step really comes down to which stakeholders are going to be involved, and making sure that the case manager did invite everybody, necessary, at least for this first addendum meeting. And again, this is all aligned with the school LCAP, with goal number 1 and 4 in regards to just this interdisciplinary approach that Sharon talked about, and really having this collective team really work in Marco's interest, because honestly, we don't know really what's happened in the past. This is the principal's 2nd year, and so we're really wanting to figure out everything at this first addendum meeting. So it's probably going to be pretty lengthy. But the people involved, definitely we'd encourage to have Marco present, his parents, the advocate, principal. I thought it'd be important for the program specialist to also attend, the special ed teacher, and of course the general ed teacher. And instead of really going into detail how this entire meeting would run, I'm just going to do kind of a brief overview, but it would start by just checking in with Marco. And this would start by just going around the table with all the stakeholders during the introduction, and have each stakeholder bring up something positive about Marco that they've observed this year. And during that time, kind of give Marco the floor and ask him how he's liking school. Does he like school? Is he having any issues? What does Marco think about all of this? And then really giving the floor to his parents. And before we bring the data and everything that the school has been doing, just really actively listening to the parents' concerns. Because again, like disclosed in the case study, the parent believes that the teacher demonstrates a lack of perceived efficacy for the delivery of the accommodations that is currently set in the IEP, which is huge. And so we really want to make sure and clarify which accommodations are not being met. We're going to dive deep by looking into what has already been tried in the quantitative data, looking at previous goals and whether they were met or not met, what accommodations have worked in the past, what have not worked, what do we currently have, but really going through all of the information that we can to best sort of paint the picture for our next steps for Marco. But I think what's going to be the most essential piece to all this, go ahead and go back, Brett, is going to be, go ahead and go back, is the qualitative piece. And that's just the narrative from the team, but really giving each member of the team the opportunity to really discuss, what they think might be happening and what more the breakdown might be with the accommodations or the modifications, and really making sure that we take that time to listen to each other and ensure that we are all in agreement towards, what the issues are. And then we would kind of finish with next steps. And this is just clarifying how the team will address all concerns, and that'll move into this action plan that I've developed. So this action plan, this would be facilitated, I believe, by the program specialist. But what we would be doing during the meeting is listing out all members involved and really listening to the parents' concerns and picking out these themes. And I've got some hypothetical themes here for us. But what we're going to do is just to make sure before we end this meeting, every single team member involved knows exactly their role and what they're supposed to do for the next 3 months before we meet again to do a check-in and see how everything's going. Because we just want to make sure that everybody is in agreement and understands what next steps are going to happen to ensure that, you know, Marco is receiving the education that he deserves. Something that I'd like to touch on is maybe just the principal's take on all of this. And one of the themes that came up is we were talking about monitoring school improvements that enhance Marco's sense of belonging. Something that the principal is going to touch on during this first meeting, and we're sort of going to switch gears from third person to first person. But we are going to have the principal really, during this meeting, inform the parent of this new strategy that has been implemented by the school, and that is the UDL framework. And so during the meeting, we would have the principal take the floor, and I'm going to go ahead and have Erica take on the next slide to discuss UDL.
So one of the determinations that's sometimes made in IEP meetings when there's a disagreement around the accommodations that are being made is that sometimes it is not necessarily a lack of accommodations, but really the fact that there's a missing framework for lesson design and lesson planning. And so last year, we'll say that the decision was made to implement the UDL, Universal Design for Learning framework. We're assuming that this meeting has happened somewhere towards not at the very beginning of this school year. And so we would have thought at this point in the year, teachers and staff would have already gone through some UDL training. And so now we'd expect them to be in the implementation stage. So really the training that staff would have had would have helped them shift their lens in how they think about lesson design. So Universal Design for Learning is a proactive lesson design framework that keeps learner variability in mind from the very start of the planning process. So as an example, everyone, you, me, Marco, even, all of us have variable strengths and needs and interests across a whole wide range of learning characteristics. So if you take a look in the upper right corner, it says student learning profile. This is a little example of what a learning profile might look like. A lot of us would have really high areas of strength and interest in some categories and low in others. And we're all very, very different. And when we start by acknowledging that learner variability, we begin to realize that barriers are created that exclude learners when we expect them all to proceed through a lesson in the same way. And this is especially true for those 52% undocumented learners that Sharon was talking about, including English learners, foster youth, and students with disabilities like Marco. And so the training that our staff would have had would be, they'd learn how to start recognizing barriers to learning in the materials, in the policies, in the procedures and task selections. Traditionally in the IEP process, or when we think about students with disabilities, we think about the barriers as inherent within the child, within the student. So Marco or another student with disabilities we might talk about them in terms of they lack prior knowledge for the lesson. And that actually, that's deficit thinking, and it puts the barrier within the child, and it's very difficult for the teacher to think about changing that. But what UDL does is it shifts our thinking and it places that barrier in the environment. It has people looking at the lesson design that maybe it doesn't connect to or activate prior knowledge well. And maybe the barrier lives within the teacher's expectations for Marco. So recognizing barriers in the environment is really key to being able to reduce or remove those barriers. And then providing options is the next step in universal design for learning for how students are going to engage with the learning, represent their learning, and express their understanding of new learning. So providing options, what we know about our students' strengths, needs, and interests is what makes that learning adjustable and responsive to the whole range of capacities, versus planning our lessons with that limited view of a non-existent average or mythical normal student. Next slide, Brett. So at this stage of implementation, we would set up an improvement cycle. So this might be a PDSA cycle, some sort of improvement science. And we would start as the professional learning, we're gonna start with a team that it may be some of the same members from our interdisciplinary IEP team. It may include program specialists. It would definitely include general education teacher and a special ed teacher, and it would involve Marco and students like Marco, especially at that part about selecting an improvement goal. So what the image that you're seeing in front of you is the UDL guidelines. And so using that those UDL guidelines to help select an improvement goal helps focus the work of the improvement team. Once that improvement goal has been selected, then they start thinking about, well, what is it going to look like if we really have succeeded, and determine that success criteria. Think about what data can we collect to show whether or not we've been successful. And then again, using the guidelines here to select instructional strategies based on their learner variability. So they might use a strategy that would appeal to some of the higher interest areas and strength areas on that student profile we looked at in that last slide. And they might select some scaffolds for some of the higher needs that were exhibited in the classroom. And then they would evaluate the data and adjust that. So, and then this cycle just continues. Next slide, thank you. So specifically how the UDL framework benefits Marco and those other 52% of our undocumented students, including students with disabilities, English learners specifically. The UDL framework really started in the special ed world and is moving into general ed because they're finding that this framework is really, really helpful for designing for all students. So when we learn about the UDL framework, it really shifts our thinking about student learning, and we think of it not in terms of disability, but more in terms of variability. And that really allows us to see and utilize student strengths versus really trying to fix their deficits and point out what's broken. And it really honors their strengths and positions their strengths to be contributions to the learning environment. And the UDL framework also shifts our thinking about barriers, as I said before, as existing in the environment rather than inherent in the child. And that really promotes the development of a more positive academic identity and reduces the anxiety. And then using the UDL guidelines to select options for how students access the learning goals, how they represent the new ideas, how they express their learning, by making those options available to all students and not limiting it just to a certain subsection of students. We really recognize that the learner variability is normal and it's expected, and it doesn't single anyone out as out of the ordinary or as they are somehow something less than their peers that needs to be fixed. Next slide.
At this point, we want to express that we believe that this administrator will be able to head into the second IEP meeting with a great deal of confidence, as will the rest of the team. One of the key goals of this administrator, as per the LCAP goals, is to build a solid interdisciplinary team. And a key part of that, as with the first IEP meeting, was the incredible necessity of communication. And you can see just how heavily that was emphasized in the first IEP meeting. And the large goal of the second IEP meeting will be summarizing that progress. You heard about weekly progress checks between the parent, the general ed teacher, as well as the SPED teacher, and the levels of collaboration that are occurring between them. And it is that key element of that communication that we believe that will speak largely to the dynamic that was missing between Marco and his experience at school. And that communication is further reinforced and bolstered by the implementation of universal design for learning, and allowing Marco to feel much more empowered in his experience at school. So between that incredible amount of communication between these stakeholders and this implementation that has enabled and empowered Marco to a greater degree, it's allowed this principal to meet a second LCAP goal, and that is namely to raise the ELA scores as well as the math scores for the special education students. We can see that Marco's scores alone have increased 10%. His English scores have gone up 22%. Now that's not the standardized test yet, but with gains that dramatic in such a short period of time, we're confident that the rest of the special education department will experience similar levels of success. And at this point, it allows the parents to see an incredible investment that this team has made in their son. And as such, they're able to see some of those gains that Marco has made at home. And those gains can be in the form of this, the sports that he's playing, the chores that he's taking on. He's willing to take greater risks. And that, we believe, is the greatest success of this plan. By implementing universal design for learning, by counting on the incredible levels of collaboration that already exist within the team, they're able and willing to take greater risks together and build the kind of success that Marco can meet with, and so can they. We want to thank you for your time, and hope that you found this informative and allow you to feel empowered to create the sorts of plans necessary to help your kids meet with success. Thank you.